So our next presentation is a very timely and important conversation on one of our biggest demographic shifts that we're going to experience, and it is our ageing future, a regional opportunity. Aotearoa, New Zealand is already an ageing nation, and here in Nelson, we're on track to be the oldest city in New Zealand. By 2053, 29% of Nelson's population is projected to be over 65, the highest proportion of any New Zealand city. The fastest growing age group is not retirees, it's people over the age of 85. The number of New Zealanders aged 85 plus will more than double over the coming decades. For our region, the working age population that we will need to staff our businesses, fund our rates, and care for our older people are by and large, not even here yet. The natural population growth here is nowhere near big enough to service the retired and older population without significant migration into the area. Our next guest really needs no introduction to a Nelson audience and to this community, but I'll give her one anyway. It is, of course, Nicky McDonald, who has given many years of service to this place through Nelson City Council. I didn't count Nicky, don't worry, I haven't got a number. Most of you will know Nicky through her work with Nelson City Council. She has last year taken up the role as Director of the Office for Seniors, which, given the context we just talked about, feels like a very fitting role for a very Nelson appointment. But one of the pieces of work that Nicky, one of the many legacies or contributions that I think Nicky made during her time at Nelson City Council was developing the City for All Ages strategy. A hugely important piece of work that really brought this issue right to the surface and was quite pioneering in terms of regions in the country doing that, and deservedly got a lot of national recognition and was an award-winning piece of work that became a stepping stone for the area that Nicky now focuses on as Director for the Office of Seniors. So it is really wonderful to have you back with us, Nicky, and please welcome Nicky McDonald to the stage.
Tēnā koutou katoa, and thank you, Johnny, for that kind introduction. When Ali rang to see if I would talk at Aspire, I actually jumped at the chance. Although I'm living in Wellington now, I had many years living in Tasman and working in Nelson, and Te Tauihu is still home for me. And there's nothing I like better than talking about this very special region through the lens of its demographics. Because make no mistake, this region does stand out. We are in a country that's ageing, but we're going faster and further than most other parts of the nation. So I'm going to talk about why the ageing population is an opportunity for us. But first I want to set out some wider context for what is happening in Te Tauihu. The changes that we're seeing in this region are just a microcosm of what's happening around the world. And then I'll talk about the opportunity I believe the region has to benefit. So what I'll argue is if we treat ageing as a cost and a problem to fix, we'll fall behind. If we treat it as a shift we can design an economic response around, then Nelson Tasman can position itself as a leader. But let's start by taking a look at the global level. The ageing demographic, it's really a defining trend for our time. It's said that by 2080, there'll be more people over 65 in the world than there will be young people under 18. So global ageing is big news, but it's not bad news. If we're lucky, each of us in this room will have a chance to grow old, and we might get several extra decades than earlier generations could hope for. This is a huge achievement by humanity, yet we treat it as some sort of natural disaster. You'll have seen the headlines: agequake, silver tsunami, demographic storm or cliff or bomb. But we're here because of hundreds of years of steady improvements, things like public health and vaccines, nutrition, housing, welfare, education has gifted us unprecedented longevity. And we didn't get here because something went wrong, we got here because so many things went right. I'm not trying to minimise there are challenges. I think everybody's seen the discussions about, cost of the health budget and what are we going to do about superannuation. And I do realise that while this change has been a long time in the coming, it is speeding up now, and that can feel quite difficult. But I'd like to challenge us all to think of ageing population not as a problem, but an achievement and a huge opportunity, both for us personally, but also collectively. And longer lifespans are happening hand in hand with another really significant change, which is the steady decline in the birth rate. To keep a population steady, you really need that number, which I should more properly call the fertility rate, at about 2.1 per woman. The global rate for childbirth, fertility rate, in 2024 was 2.25, which is very close to replacement rate, and it's dropping further. Stats New Zealand shows New Zealand is this year at 1.53, so that's well below replacement. And there are countries that are much lower. If you look at Japan, its rate is barely above 1. You may have seen in the news recently talk that it's lost 3 million off its population over the last 5 years. So many countries have tried all sorts of things to try and reverse this falling fertility. There's been tax breaks and baby bonuses, and you might have seen the pro-natalist movement. And all I can say is that declining fertility rate has proved very resistant to any sort of intervention. Now, what's offsetting that fertility rate drop, both nationally and very much for this region, is migration. So in Nelson, Tasman, deaths have outnumbered births since 2023. So it's internal and international migration that is keeping the population from decline. Although I do note that the year to June 25, in fact, we had no growth at all. It was zero growth for the region. But the demographers that I've talked to said that there is still migration-driven growth to be had for the region over the coming years, and they imagine the population slowing and then plateauing maybe around the middle of the century. So if the region does want to offset some of that underlying natural population decline we have, then attracting and retaining migrants is going to be key. And I do want to spend a moment on migrants because they do play a really important role in this ageing demographic, falling fertility equation. But I note migration is quite a divisive issue at the moment in some places. But equally, the developed world has never been more dependent on migrants for economic growth than right now. So it can be very important for the economy in places like our region where natural increase in ageing population are having that impact. Obviously, in a world where populations are going to be trending down, migration is only going to be an answer for so long, but it can be a buffer to those impacts while we get the economy adjusted to this new world. And the welcoming nature of our region, its openness to new arrivals, whether they're domestic or they're international, is going to be a really important protective factor for us. And although there is this active debate going on in the world about how much immigration is the right amount, the long-run trends are predicted to be that there's going to be intense international competition for talent, and that the competition between regions in New Zealand for inwards migration is going to get quite fierce. And I would also say we need to be conscious, because we're a region with a growing number of older people, we need a really robust aged care sector. And those workers most usually come from migration. So the association that provides the vast majority of aged care across New Zealand says 70% of its workers are on work visas, mainly from the Philippines and India. And in 2025, health and care and social assistance overtook in the region the manufacturing, agriculture and forestry and fishing to become the region's largest employment industry. So I'll just say you can see this growing older population as a problem we need to fix. Or you can turn it round and think of the opportunity just in aged care, where innovations in care models and health technologies that we could develop for our region's own residents are going to find very ready markets elsewhere in the country and overseas. So that's the backdrop. Now we can move from that big picture down to what's happening at the regional level. And my focus is going to be on who will do the work, who are our customers, who will own the businesses, and who keeps that unpaid economy going. So if we have a look at this slide, a bit much detail at this scale, but you should be able to see on the left that's Nelson, and on the right is Tasman. Those green bars are New Zealand. So the youngest age groups at the bottom, going up to our oldest, 90 years and over at the top. And you can see our line, the Nelson line, we have an excess of people at that older age compared to New Zealand, and then we have gaps down the bottom in those younger age groups. Exactly the same pattern there for Tasman. And if we look at this slide, we can see it for all 3 councils of Te Tau Ihu. And this is a slide showing from the last census in 2023, forward 30 years, what does that look like? And you can see there we are, Tasman, second top to West Coast, then Nelson, and then Marlborough. So our region as a whole, we are right up the top in terms of ageing. And so let's talk about why that's an opportunity for us. So the OECD, in its 2025 employment outlook, the subtitle of which is, Can We Get Through the Demographic Crunch? It says the population ageing is shaping labour markets and without action can cause a dramatic slowdown in economic growth. And what they recommended to their members was mobilising untapped labour resources to boost growth. And a key one of those was older workers. So in 2024, 7% of the New Zealand workforce as a whole was already 65 or older, and their paid work was valued at around 9 billion. And if you add on the self-employed over 65s, that brings you up to 14 billion. So that's a significant contribution. The number of over 65s still in work over the next 50 years is expected to double. And I'd just like to give full credit to this region, in fact, because when we had Nelson Tasman Regional Skills Leadership Groups, we were one of only 2 regions in New Zealand that prioritised looking at older workers. And that was thanks to Ali and also Justin Carter, who were chairs at the time. But I think that was very far-sighted, given how crucial older workers are going to become. We've also just taken a look at what it means for Nelson Tasman in terms of that future labour force. So this shows where the growth is coming in future. So this is the new workers entering the labour market over that 30 years from 2023. And you can see there's very little growth in the under 30 age group. And most of the extra growth is coming in that middle age, sort of late 30s through to early 50s. And you can already see that significant contribution over 65. So what we really need is to work out ways to keep those extra workers in that middle group able to be working for longer, to have a sustainable career into later life. In the 15 years from 2023, our region's labour force is projected to grow by only about 6,000 workers. So that's less than 10% growth. For the nation as a whole, it's going to be double that. So we really have to be looking at these untapped sources. Older workers, and within older workers, I would say older women are a particular source of potential, because although they get to 70 at around the same rate work participation, as men, it then really falls off a cliff for women. And I'd only be speculating to think why that is, but I mean, one factor might be caregiving roles that they take on. So there's an opportunity there for employers who want to keep skilled workers to be having a conversation with their older workers and seeing what flexibility they can offer that can keep those people and that experience in their business. So increasingly, the question won't be, how do we replace our older workers? The question will be, how can we retain them, attract them, and get the best from the experience that they have? And this is not just an economic imperative. I do have the best interests of older workers at heart, believe me. When we consulted on the Older Workers Employment Action Plan, there was one message that came through loud and clear. For older workers, employment is about so much more than a pay packet. They told us it provides purpose, identity, social connection, a sense of belonging, and that opportunity to keep contributing. And those views really echo what's been coming out of Massey University's longitudinal study. For 20 years, they've been studying health, work and retirement in New Zealand. And that's exactly what they found, that there were big improvements in older workers' well-being for all those reasons, that sense of purpose, that sense of being connected, staying active, and also that bit of extra money that helps when they do transition out of work. Now, the caveat, obviously, is that it's suitable work. There will always be those whose jobs, perhaps because they're very physically demanding, where it won't be suitable to continue into later life. Personally, I'd love to see more investment in that mid-career area, some career guidance, so that people can plot a path to a sustainable career that will allow them to stay on longer. And that may be switching careers, it may be extra education and training, but we do need to be putting more effort in there. And how do you, if you're an employer, encourage and support your older workers? Well, there's already a great tool on the Chamber of Commerce website, the Older Worker Employment Toolkit, which the Office for Seniors built to help employers to recruit, upskill and retain older workers. But I would also suggest a few other things. In particular, try to avoid making assumptions about a person's willingness or ability to learn. A key area of bias that really shows up is the access that older workers have to training. And I think often employers feel it's not worth investing because they'll be retiring soon. But in fact, they might be with you for another 5-10 years, and wouldn't you want them to have those skills to be putting to use for you? And it's true that younger workers may come in and move on quite frequently. So I think it's more about looking at the individual and what training they might need than looking at an age. The other thing is to remember that older workers want flexibility that can help them balance other responsibilities like caring. Maybe there's volunteering they're passionate about. Maybe they need that flexibility so they can slowly transition out of work. And none of this is about doing a favour for older workers. It's just about recognising that they're going to be vital to the regional economy. So that's the older workers part of the picture. Now I'm going to turn to who are the customers. So this is national data, and it shows that the annual spend by consumers over 65 is 55 billion. And this is the silver economy that you may have seen in newspapers and so on. There's a lot of buzz about it. But it is a very real driver behind changing spending patterns. Now, my team did for me a little crude estimation of what that might amount to in Nelson Tasman. We've just divided it on a population basis. But that would be 1.6 billion a year in spending. And it's true that not all of that 1.6 billion will stay in the region, but that's still a very substantial economic force in a region that has a GDP of around 7.6 billion. And this is one of the fastest growing consumer segments that we have. So this year, the Nielsen Consumer and Media Insights report that came out said that more than a third of older New Zealanders have discretionary spending power. Almost 80% of them were planning a domestic holiday this year. Nearly half intended to travel overseas. Almost half are considering buying a new car. And 1 in 3 are planning home improvements. They're also discerning customers. 7 in every 10 said they were actively trying to buy New Zealand products and saying that they'll take their business elsewhere if they get poor service. They value quality, they value trust, and they really like businesses that understand their needs. The Nielsen report summarised all of this as a major opportunity for business to understand a growing consumer group with real purchasing power, but it ended by warning against relying on old assumptions about your older customers. So, businesses that want to take advantage of the silver economy will be making sure they've segmented their market by age, put effort into understanding the needs of older customers, and paid attention to the accessibility of their services. And accessibility is often a missed opportunity and not done well. So think, can your customers complete a booking if the digital process fails them? Is information readable by someone with poor eyesight? Is your website easy to navigate? Can they speak to a real person if they want to? And most importantly, can your staff offer help to them without patronising them or making assumptions? The opportunity here isn't just to sell more stuff to older people. It's to better understand one of the largest, fastest growing, and often overlooked customer groups, and to build products, services, and experiences that will genuinely meet their needs. Older customers can be incredibly loyal. They're also quick to walk away if they feel ignored or taken for granted. So, who will run our businesses? We often talk about startups as though entrepreneurship is largely a young person's game. But in fact, the age group 55 to 65 is one of the fastest growing groups of entrepreneurs around the developed world. A 2020 American study found that founders who were over 50 were twice as successful as founders who were under 30. A lifetime of experience adds up to some very transferable skills. And we already see that potential in this region. The Primetime program, which has supported later life entrepreneurship, that was run by the Chamber of Commerce, supported by the Office for Seniors and Nelson City Council. And that work's still continuing in the Chamber today through mentoring of older entrepreneurs. Now, that first program was part of a national program of pilots around the country, and when they surveyed the participants, 70% of them said their main motivation was not a desire to make money. They wanted to make a difference. They wanted to solve a problem, share their knowledge, create something useful, or contribute to their community. Very similar to those values that older workers were talking about. So for regions like New Zealand and Nelson, senior entrepreneurism is an additional opportunity to provide local ownership and local jobs. Now, another thing that we need to think around owners of small and medium-sized businesses, of which we have many in the region, is the fact that many of them are getting prepared to exit their business around now. And we're seeing that baby boomer exit from businesses. Now, we've had a number of difficult years economically, and what we're seeing is that those older employers can have been so busy keeping their heads above water, they haven't had time or headspace to plan an exit. It takes quite a lot of time to exit your small business. You need to have your financials in order, so you've got good books to show a potential buyer. You need to get a proper valuation, and you need to reduce the dependency on the owner. Often that smaller business is very much tied up with one person, and you need to be able to hand it off to someone else. And you also need to be thinking strategically about where it might go. Is there someone in your family who might want it? Is there an employee who might want to purchase? Are you looking at a third party? Would you do a staged exit? And where would you find those buyers? There's a lot of work that goes into a good transition. And if this planning hasn't been done for some reason, or maybe you need to do a sort of a rushed exit, health problems, whatever, then what we see is the business value eroding, and you may have to close rather than sell. And there's two consequences there that aren't good. One is that person doesn't have the retirement income that they were counting on. And secondly, there can be a loss of jobs in the region. The other thing we do see a bit in the Office for Seniors, which is very sad, is where business owners feel they just can't leave because they can't get a sale and they can't walk away from that value. And so they are staying on in business and feeling trapped. So I think it's really important that we think about anything we can do to help those business owners in the region who are heading towards exit, think about it and plan for it carefully. Now, I couldn't finish without talking about the unpaid work that gets done. So in New Zealand, unpaid work every year is worth $20 billion. And that is the work that keeps the community functioning. It helps run community organisations, can be clubs, maraes, churches, charities, emergency services. They can be the backbone of your community. And this number, 20 billion, which sounds like a lot to me, is actually quite an underestimate. The only way we can work it out is we look at the number of volunteer hours and then we cost it based on an average of the minimum wage and the carer's wage. But we all know people working in the community who would be paid a lot more in terms of market value if they were being paid for that role. So I remember watching Craig Potton and Anne Herkis raise $6 million for the Suta redevelopment, and that was definitely not a minimum wage effort. So I do just want to give credit to what older people are doing in the communities that is not paid work and recognise how important it is. The reality is that a lot of what we call community spirit is actually unrecognised economic infrastructure. So as I close, I just wanted to tell you a story about a conversation I had that I think is really relevant to the region. And this was with Natalie Jackson, who is one of our preeminent demographers in New Zealand. And this was some years ago when she was doing some work for Nelson City Council. And I said, look, Natalie, if you are a council facing an ageing community, what's the best strategy? And she said, well, there's actually been research on this. I got one of my graduate students to look at this, and they looked all around the world at different ageing communities, and they had a set of criteria by which to judge them, and they had a real range. From at one end, there were communities that really weren't paying attention to ageing and didn't want to look at it, so they went on business as usual. At the other end, you had those communities that said, okay, we're ageing. Well, if we're going to age, we're going to be the best damn old place to grow old in the world and really put their heart into it. And in between, they had mixes of the two, of all sorts. And Natalie said, no prize for guessing, the worst was those that ignored it. They scored the worst on criteria. But what surprised me was running a very close second worst was the other group who really leaned into ageing. And it turns out people don't want to move to a community that sort of brands itself as a place for older people. And so obviously the Goldilocks spot is there in the middle, where you're doing that planning, you're absolutely recognising what the demographics of your community needs, and you're preparing for that, spending money on the necessary infrastructure and services. But you're also doing all those things that a go-ahead community does. You're welcoming newcomers, you're thinking about new events to create, you're making sure you're delivering great services so that you can continue to attract people. This region is one of the fastest ageing in the whole country, and there's an opportunity to embrace that and make the most of the opportunities it offers. And whether they're in paid work or volunteering, or the customers walking up and down Trafalgar and Queen Street, keeping it busy during the day, older residents are part of the productive base in this region and an economic force. Their contribution is significant and it's growing. And I'd like us to try and make the most of that. And I thought I'd just end with this quote. It's by Sarah Harper. She established the Oxford University Population Ageing Institute, where I had some time as a visiting research fellow. And what I used to love about her was her absolute frustration at the world's inability to really grasp the opportunity of longevity. And so she said last year, we need to create new ways of living and working that enable us to take advantage of the massive cohort of healthy, active, older, creative adults. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Nicky. That was absolutely fascinating. So much to chew over there, and there's a lot of questions. So we're going to rip straight into those because we've got a few minutes. So the first one is, do you have data on how many people move to our district to retire, and if they're happy having moved away from home, friends and family? Are we building to accommodate retirees from away?
Well, I'd say we are definitely building to accommodate retirees. There's a lot of development going on in retirement villages in the region. I don't have actual numbers, but anecdotally, are people happy moving? On the whole, the feedback we get from people in retirement villages who've moved to somewhere for a lifestyle is that they are happy. There is a small minority who perhaps didn't realise how binding a move into a retirement village can be financially. And then if something changes and they want to move on, they find it's quite difficult because the way the financials work, if they exit, they don't have sufficient to buy again. So, but I would say the vast majority of people in retirement villages I talk to are very happy with what they have purchased.
This next question is, strategically, if there is a significantly higher population of older people in the region, shouldn't we be putting more focus on retaining the younger age group, given they don't seem to stay? I think I asked you this once too, no.
Yes, that's right. No, look, I wouldn't suggest that you deflect any of your attention from trying to retain young people. They do tend to move out of the region. We've seen this for many decades, to go off to explore the world, to go to university or other training. But they often have very fond memories of this region, and it is not too difficult a thing to bring them back if you can. So I'd say all effort in that, absolutely. But that doesn't mean you don't also put effort into the people you have here now who have experience and value that you can benefit from.
So I had put in a related question, which was around your reflecting on your experience of the City for All Ages work, and I guess the concept of a City for All Ages. How much common ground do you see between a city that works for children and young people and a city that works for older people? Are there many conflicts there, or is a City for All Ages, does that support the concepts you're talking about?
I really think it supports both. When you design, I guess when you're designing for older people, you are thinking about the situations where they might be vulnerable. And when you design for your most vulnerable, you make your city accessible for everyone. If you're making clear wayfinding, that helps young people as well as visitors to the city, not just older people. If you're making those paths easy to negotiate, that's good for young families with strollers. So you're really just trying to make your city the best and provide the best services, and that benefits the whole community.
And I couldn't let that pass without a plug for the fact that Bridge to Better, which of course is going to be a massive infrastructure upgrade for our city, will be looking at an entirely different streetscape design, and of course the most accessible, the biggest upgrade in accessibility standards around seating and surfacing and those things that any of us have seen in our lifetimes in Nelson, which will set a new precedent. So very exciting as that comes online. A nice practical one here from Emily, which is, and you mentioned the Chamber website as one source, but what resources can you recommend for helping support older employees to thrive?
Well, the Office for Seniors has a lot of resources, and there has been work done by MB as well. But if you look on our website, we have a specific area for older workers and what you can do to support them. And if you can't find it, you can just email me. On our website, we have Office for Seniors, and you just put for Nicky, and I'll follow up any questions or find any resource that you need.
Perfect, thank you. We've still got a few more to get through here. This is, I think, the most questions we've had today, actually. So this one is from Jackie. It's, where does equity sit in the context of the longevity discussion? Are we all enjoying longer lives?
Yeah, no, that's certainly not the case. And in fact, most of the work that my team and I do is focusing on more vulnerable New Zealanders. But one thing I would say is the way that our superannuation is set up, because it's tagged to wages, it is very protective, and we don't see the levels of poverty amongst our older adults that other places do see. But it's true that, levels of disability can be higher in older age. There are communities that are more rural that are struggling with transport. I think everybody is a bit worried about healthcare and availability of dementia beds. That's where we are putting most of our effort and trying to get most government action, is to support the most vulnerable. And then there's this opportunity for those who are doing better to enjoy really great life here in Nelson, Tasman.
I'll just put one to you as well around the, you mentioned at the start about the affordability questions for healthcare and superannuation and savings. What's your observations been since you started in your role? I've seemed to be, with recent announcements and where political parties are sitting, it seems to be this maybe the first election where it is actually a defining issue. Is that
Yes.
what you're seeing as well?
Yes, absolutely. I remember starting in my job, and of course you pay more attention to articles in the newspaper. It seemed like every week there was one article on it, and then there was two, and it has just got more intense after that. So I do think it is going to be one of those big issues during the election, superannuation income. But there is also a ministerial working group on aged care, which is going to report back in the next few weeks. And that, I think, is going to get a lot of attention too. I don't know that it'll be enough to make decisions through this election process, but that is how we fix what is quite a broken aged care system at the moment is going to be a crucial question for whoever does come into power.
And last question here from Chris, which is, does the government have a response to the economic cost of my parents and all my mates' parents spending all our inheritance on boat cruises and cycling trips around Europe?
No, we actually encourage that. We say spend the inheritance because those young people will make their own money.
Please put your hands together for Nicky McDonald.